16-year-old Malik Johnson, still catching his breath from basketball practice, froze in place as the sound of screeching tires echoed down the quiet suburban street. His heart skipped a beat, but his face remained calm. From a young age, he had been taught how to handle moments like this. Stay still, keep your voice even, keep your hands visible, and above all, don't give them a reason to escalate. Officer Carter, known throughout the neighborhood for his aggressive tactics, stepped out of his cruiser, his sharp gaze fixed on Malik, sizing him up. His hand hovered near the holster on his hip, a silent but unmistakable warning. This wasn't a random stop. Malik knew he was being profiled. The officer's voice cut through the still air, loud enough to draw the attention of neighbors, peering cautiously from behind their curtains. He demanded to know where Malik was going. Slowly, Malik turned to face him and responded, steady but respectful, that he was heading home. Years of his mother's lessons echoed in his mind, but Carter wasn't looking for reasons to de-escalate. His sneer deepened as he questioned Malik, accusing him of carrying drugs or stolen goods. The accusation stung, but Malik didn't flinch. He unzipped his backpack and pulled out a scuffed basketball and sweat-stained jersey, holding them out as proof of his innocence. It wasn't enough. Carter snatched the bag and dumped its contents onto the ground. The basketball bounced into the gutter. The jersey landed in a murky puddle. The humiliation burned in Malik's chest, but he resisted the urge to react. Instead, he protested, his voice trembling slightly. The officer snapped back, ordering Malik to watch his tone and asserting his authority over the neighborhood. As Carter leaned closer, the tension thickened. A small crowd began to gather, drawn by the raised voices. Their murmurs grew louder, concern and unease rippling through the onlookers. Malik glanced around, drawing strength from the presence of the crowd. He raised his voice just enough to be heard and accused Carter of profiling him. The words landed like a bomb, sending a wave of gasps through the onlookers. For the first time, Carter hesitated, but only briefly. He masked his discomfort with mockery, telling Malik he didn't know what he was talking about and to keep quiet if he knew what was good for him. His words were meant to intimidate, but Malik stood his ground, insisting he knew his rights. The crowd stirred, emboldened by Malik's defiance. Phones were raised, their cameras capturing every moment. Among them was Angela, a neighborhood activist. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the rising tension as she held her phone high and recorded the scene. She demanded to know what Carter was doing, declaring loudly that Malik had done nothing wrong. The shift in power was immediate. Angela's unwavering stance and the collective voices of the crowd began to erode Carter's confidence. The spotlight had shifted, and it wasn't on Malik anymore. It was on Carter. Angela refused to back down, stating that she wouldn't let this go unnoticed. More voices joined hers, calling for fairness and justice. Carter's attempts to assert control faltered as the growing crowd closed ranks around Malik. The sound of another police car approached, cutting through the noise. The crowd parted slightly as Captain Ramirez arrived. His presence was commanding, his reputation for fairness and integrity well known in the community. The air grew still as he stepped forward to assess the situation, his calm authority setting the stage for justice to be served. Officer Carter wasn't just interrogating Malik, he was performing, turning what should have been a routine encounter into a public spectacle. His tone, laced with condescension, echoed through the street, taunting Malik with accusations. Carter sneered as he questioned Malik, mocking him with suggestions that he might be skipping school, stealing, or simply too arrogant to explain himself. Malik stood still, his chest tight with frustration, his palms visible at his sides. He had been taught how to behave in situations like this. Stay calm. Don't escalate. but every word Carter spoke felt like a deliberate challenge to his dignity, a provocation Malik struggled to ignore. Malik told him firmly that he hadn't done anything wrong and was just heading home from basketball practice. His voice was steady, but the slight tremor in his hands betrayed the anger and fear he was holding back. He couldn't let it show. Not here, not now. Carter stepped closer, invading Malik's personal space, his disdain palpable. He mocked Malik's words, laughing at his innocence and ridiculing him as just another kid who claimed to be minding his own business. The officer's words were punctuated with a chuckle that sent a wave of unease through the growing crowd. Carter's eyes flicked briefly toward the murmuring onlookers, but he didn't care. This was his show, and Malik was his target. He reached for Malik's backpack, shaking it as though it concealed evidence of some crime. The zipper rattled loudly, almost drowning out Carter's mocking tone, as he insinuated Malik might be hiding drugs, weapons, or stolen items. Carter claimed it was always people like Malik who had something to hide. The crowd gasped audibly at Carter's words, and Malik's hands clenched into fists before he released them, controlling his breathing to stay composed. Malik raised his voice slightly, accusing Carter of profiling him and asserting that he knew his rights. The simple statement landed like a bomb in the charged atmosphere, stirring the crowd and intensifying their whispers. For the first time, Carter hesitated. The words, "I know my rights," seemed to cut through his confidence like a blade, but the hesitation was brief. He masked his discomfort with renewed bravado, raising his voice to drown out the murmurs of the crowd. Carter mocked Malik's assertion, belittling his knowledge of the law and demanding obedience. The crowd, emboldened by Malik's defiance, began inching closer. Phones were raised, their cameras capturing every word and movement. Among the onlookers, Angela, a neighborhood activist, stepped to the front, her phone held high. Her voice was strong and clear as she addressed Carter directly, stating that the boy had done nothing wrong and accusing Carter of harassment. Angela's words sparked a shift in the energy of the scene. More voices joined hers, calling for fairness and justice. Carter's jaw tightened, and his composure slipped as he glanced nervously at the growing wall of phones and disapproving faces surrounding him. The tables were turning, but Carter wasn't ready to back down. He took a step closer to Malik, lowering his tone, but making it more threatening. He warned Malik not to think he could get away with disrespecting him. But Malik stood firm, his voice rising slightly as he refuted Carter's claim. He hadn't disrespected anyone, Malik said, but Carter was out of line. Once again, Malik reminded him that he knew his rights. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices growing louder in solidarity. Carter's face flushed, his authority slipping away like sand through his fingers. Turning toward Angela, he pointed an accusing finger, threatening that she would regret her actions if she didn't stop recording. Angela didn't flinch. Her phone stayed steady, her voice unwavering as she declared that the only one who would regret anything was Carter. She promised the footage would go online and expose his behavior for all to see. Carter's bravado finally cracked. The cameras, the voices, and the collective strength of Malik and Angela overwhelmed him. He scanned the street searching for an escape, but there was none. And then, the sound of another police car approached, its engine growing louder as it pulled into the scene. The crowd parted slightly, making way for Captain Ramirez. His presence was calm but commanding, his reputation for fairness known throughout the community. Ramirez stepped out of his car, his eyes scanning the scene with quiet authority. Malik held his breath as the captain approached, his gaze shifting between Carter, the crowd, and Malik himself. The captain's demeanor was steady, a stark contrast to Carter's unraveling confidence. Justice, it seemed, was about to make its entrance. The murmurs of the crowd grew louder as Angela stepped forward, holding her phone high with its camera focused squarely on Carter. Her voice cut through the tension sharply, accusing Carter of harassing Malik without cause. The crowd began to stir, emboldened by her words, as more people stepped closer, their faces a mix of concern and outrage. Carter's expression hardened, his jaw clenching as frustration flickered across his face. Angela's determination didn't waver. She declared that Carter's actions concerned everyone present and vowed to ensure the officer's abuse of power would be seen. Her phone remained steady, recording everything. Around her, bystanders followed her lead, raising their phones as the sound of cameras capturing the scene filled the air. Carter's bravado began to crumble under the weight of the moment. What had once been his stage of control now felt more like a courtroom, with the crowd acting as witnesses and judges. He tried to regain control, raising his voice to insist that recording him wouldn't change anything, and claiming he was just doing his job. He gestured toward Malik, accusing him of disrespect and needing to be taught a lesson. The crowd wasn't convinced. A young man in a hoodie stepped forward, challenging Carter and asking what respect the officer was demanding when he was tearing through a teenager's belongings for no reason. Angela echoed the sentiment, pointing out that this wasn't the first time Carter had targeted someone like Malik, and vowing that this time it wouldn't go unnoticed. The voices of the crowd grew louder, uniting in their defiance. Carter's gaze darted between Malik, Angela, and the phones pointed at him. His frustration turned into visible discomfort as the collective power of the onlookers eroded his authority. For the first time, Carter's confidence faltered. His attempts to intimidate no longer worked as the weight of accountability pressed down on him. The distant sound of another police car approaching cut through the tension, and the crowd parted slightly to make way. Captain Ramirez stepped out of the cruiser, his presence calm but commanding. The crowd quieted as Ramirez walked toward the scene, scanning the faces around him and taking in the situation. Angela lowered her phone slightly, though her resolve remained evident. Ramirez addressed Carter directly, demanding to know what was happening. Carter stammered, trying to explain his actions, but Ramirez cut him off sharply, stating that he wanted facts, not excuses. Turning to Malik, Ramirez softened his tone and asked if he was okay. Malik responded calmly, explaining that Carter had stopped him without cause, thrown his belongings to the ground, and accused him of things he hadn't done. Angela stepped forward again, offering the captain her phone with the recorded footage of the entire incident. Ramirez reviewed the video, his expression growing darker as he watched. He handed the phone back to Angela and turned to Carter, his voice cold and resolute. Ramirez declared that Carter's behavior was unacceptable, a disgrace to the department, and demanded that he hand over his badge and gun. The crowd gasped before breaking into applause and cheers. Carter's face flushed as he fumbled for words, protesting that this wasn't necessary. Ramirez dismissed his protests, stating firmly that he had seen enough. Carter, defeated, unclipped his badge and handed it over, followed by his holstered gun. The energy in the crowd shifted. What had begun as fear and outrage transformed into empowerment and triumph. Malik stood at the center of it all, absorbing the magnitude of the moment. Angela placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, telling him he had been brave and to never forget it. Malik nodded silently, his eyes reflecting both pride and relief. As the crowd began to disperse, their voices buzzed with excitement and determination. Phones remained raised, capturing the aftermath of a moment that had changed everything. Carter sat slumped in the front seat of his cruiser, his head in his hands, as the community celebrated Malik's quiet but powerful victory. Justice had been served, and a lesson in accountability had been delivered. The echoes of the event promised to resonate far beyond that street, signaling the start of something bigger. Captain Ramirez stepped out of the car, his polished boots striking the pavement with an air of quiet authority. The crowd instinctively parted, making way for him to approach. The murmurs grew quieter, replaced by the tension of anticipation. Ramirez, a man known for fairness and integrity, surveyed the scene with piercing eyes. The scattered belongings on the ground, Malik standing tall but tense, and the growing crowd all told a story. And then there was Carter, his demeanor shifting from arrogance to unease under the captain's steady gaze. Ramirez addressed Carter directly, asking what was going on. Carter stiffened, tugging at the edge of his uniform as though trying to compose himself. His voice, usually commanding, faltered as he defensively claimed he was just doing his job, and that the kid had seemed suspicious. Ramirez interrupted, his tone sharp and cutting. He demanded to know what exactly was suspicious about a teenager walking home from basketball practice. Carter hesitated, stumbling over his words as he gestured toward Malik's bag on the ground, claiming he was just trying to make sure everything was in order. Ramirez's voice rose slightly, demanding to know what Carter had been trying to ensure. Was it Malik's humiliation, right there in front of his entire neighborhood? The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, their confidence bolstered by Ramirez's words. Malik stood firm, locking eyes with the captain, his expression calm but filled with silent strength. Turning to Malik, Ramirez softened. He asked the young man if he was okay and what had happened. Malik, his voice steady but filled with emotion, explained that he hadn't done anything wrong. He described how Carter had stopped him, dumped out his belongings, and accused him without cause. His words, simple yet powerful, hung in the air, drawing the crowd's attention to Ramirez's reaction. Angela stepped forward, still holding her phone. She stated clearly that she had the entire incident on video and offered it to Ramirez. The captain reviewed the footage, his face darkening as he watched. His jaw tightened, his hands gripping the phone with controlled anger. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on Carter, who shifted nervously, his hands fidgeting as he awaited judgment. Ramirez spoke coldly, addressing Carter with a tone that left no room for argument. He called Carter's actions disgraceful, stating that they went against everything the department stood for. The captain took a step closer, his voice lowering, but losing none of its force. He demanded Carter's badge and gun, declaring that he was done. The crowd gasped, the shock rippling through them, but it was quickly replaced by cheers and applause. Carter's face turned pale as he stammered in protest, pleading with the captain and claiming that it wasn't necessary. Ramirez silenced him, firmly stating that he had seen enough and that Carter had disgraced both himself and the department. He ordered Carter to turn in his badge and gun immediately. Carter's hands trembled as he unclipped his badge, the metal gleaming under the flashing lights. Slowly, he placed it in Ramirez's outstretched hand, followed by his holstered gun. The act felt monumental, small though it was. For the first time, Carter wasn't in control. Justice was. Ramirez turned to the crowd, addressing them with a steady tone. He assured them that this wasn't what the department stood for and encouraged anyone with further concerns to come forward. He promised his door would remain open. Angela lowered her phone slightly, her expression one of cautious satisfaction. She turned to Malik, placing a hand on his shoulder and offering words of reassurance, telling him he had done well and to never let anyone diminish his courage. Malik nodded, his voice quiet but steady as he thanked her. The energy of the crowd began to shift as people dispersed, their murmurs turning into conversations about accountability and hope. For Malik, this wasn't just about standing up for himself. It was a moment that showed his community and the world the importance of demanding justice. The echoes of that night promised to carry far beyond the quiet street, leaving a lasting impact. What happened that day didn't end on the street. It was just the beginning. Angela's hands moved quickly as she uploaded the video of the incident. She typed a caption. "This is what we face every day. It's time for change." In mere minutes, the video began spreading like wildfire. By the time Malik got home, it had already been shared hundreds of times. Within hours, the city was buzzing. Outrage and support poured in from all corners as people saw the injustice Malik had endured. For the first time, the silent majority wasn't silent anymore. The video ignited a movement. Notifications flooded smartphones, comments pouring in like a tidal wave. "This is unacceptable. Proud of this kid for standing strong. When will this end?" The footage dominated local news outlets, broadcasted across television screens in living rooms, cafes, and offices. Clips of Angela's recording became a rallying cry, replayed over and over as anchors dissected the footage and legal experts weighed in on Officer Carter's actions. Malik's quiet courage became the symbol of a moment that had long been waiting for a spark. The impact of the video reached far beyond Malik's neighborhood. A community meeting was organized in a packed gymnasium, filled with determined faces. People sat shoulder to shoulder, united by a shared purpose. Malik was seated in the front row, flanked by Angela and his mother. A local activist took the podium, her voice steady but filled with passion. She reminded the crowd that Malik's experience wasn't isolated, but part of a pattern, a system that needed to be confronted. Her words carried weight as she called for accountability, not just for Officer Carter, but for every officer who believed their badge placed them above the law. The room erupted into applause, a wave of collective energy that reverberated through the gymnasium. Malik sat quietly, his expression a mixture of pride and disbelief. He hadn't set out to become a symbol of change. He was just a teenager who had stood his ground. Yet, in that moment, he represented something far greater. Meanwhile, Carter's reality was crumbling. In a dimly lit room, he sat alone at a desk, a stack of paperwork in front of him. Among the documents was his official notice of termination. The sound of a news report played faintly in the background, the voice of an anchor narrating his downfall. Public outcry had demanded justice, leading to his dismissal. Calls for a deeper investigation into systemic issues within the force echoed across the city. Carter was no longer seen as a figure of authority, but as a cautionary tale. Back in Malik's neighborhood, the community celebrated in their own way. On the side of a building, a mural was being painted. A basketball rested in one corner, a raised fist in another. At the center stood Malik, depicted with strength and quiet dignity. Neighbors gathered to admire the artwork, snapping photos and sharing stories. The mural wasn't just a piece of art. It was a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of standing together. Malik watched as the mural neared completion. Angela stood beside him, her phone in hand, a proud smile on her face. She reminded him that his actions had given people hope, urging him to remember the strength he had shown. Malik nodded, his determination clear. This wasn't just about Malik anymore. His story became a rallying cry for change, a reminder of what a single act of courage could inspire. As the mural stood tall, the message was undeniable. Justice isn't given, it's earned. Stand up, speak out, change the world, Malik's story had become everyone's story, a symbol of accountability, community, and the unstoppable power of hope.